I perched on a weathered bench outside St. Mary's Medical Centre, my fingers laced so tightly my knuckles paled. The April breeze carried the faint perfume of blooming magnolias, and sunlight glinted off the hospital's sleek windows. But the warmth couldn't touch me. My husband, James Harper, lay in the ICU beyond those walls, battling a foe we never anticipated. Passers-by chatted lightly about mundane plans, where to eat, what to binge-watch, and for a fleeting moment, I envied their carefree lives. I longed to be just another woman savoring a sunny day, debating takeout or gardening. But that version of me was gone. My world had shrunk to a sterile hospital room. Haunted by the steady beep of monitors, James was always a force of nature. He'd spend long days crafting bespoke cabinets in his workshop, then come home, whip up a meal, and ask about my day with that grin of his, one that promised everything would work out, no matter how tough things got. He was my anchor, my constant, but now, watching him weaken, I felt like I was sinking into quicksand. 8 months ago, we were dreaming big. We planned trips we couldn't yet afford, imagined a bigger home for the family we hoped to start, maybe even a puppy. Then James came home one evening, ashen and drained, waving off his exhaustion as just a rough day. But the fatigue clung to him, worsening with strange bruises and nights spent gasping for air. The diagnosis hit like a thunderbolt, aplastic anemia. His body was attacking its own bone marrow, crippling its ability to produce blood. Without a bone marrow transplant, the doctors said his chances were slim. I tried to stay strong for him, squeezing his hand and murmuring, "It will beat this." But alone at night, I'd collapse in the bathroom, tears soaked into a towel to muffle my sobs. Because I carried a truth James didn't know. He'd grown up in foster care, with no knowledge of his birth family. No parents, no siblings, no one to turn to. Finding a compatible donor without close relatives was like searching for a needle in a haystack. We'd signed up for the National Donor Program, but the doctors were blunt. The wait could stretch months, even years, and James was running out of time. This morning, his doctor pulled me aside, her words slicing through me. "Sarah, we're running low on options. If we don't find a match soon." She didn't need to finish. I understood. Sitting there, tears streaking my face, I felt powerless. I was a nurse, trained to help people heal, yet I couldn't save the man I loved most. My mind drifted to our life together, our cozy cottage on the outskirts of Chattanooga, the oak rocking chair James built for our 2nd anniversary, the handwritten note taped by the fridge, "You're my forever." The thought of losing him was unthinkable, yet a quiet voice inside warned I might have to face it. I despised myself for even entertaining the thought, but grief was already weaving its cold tendrils through my chest. Then, as if fate hadn't already dealt enough blows, I overheard a fragment of a conversation that would turn everything upside down. I met James on a night when life felt simple and unburdened. Long before hospital rooms and medical charts swallowed our days, I'd just finished my last nursing school exam, drained but exhilarated, and my friends dragged me to a cozy diner in downtown Chattanooga. It was a no-frills place, faded brick walls, creaky wooden floors, and the rich scent of brewed coffee lingering in the air. I can still picture James walking in, a canvas bag of tools slung over his shoulder, his work boots dusted with sawdust from the day. There was a quiet strength to him, a steady presence that drew your gaze. When our eyes met, he offered a shy smile and asked if the seat across from me was free. We talked for hours that evening, about everything and nothing. His passion for crafting cabinets, my dream of working in neonatal care, our shared dislike of pickles but love for blueberry pie. His laugh, full and warm, lit up his eyes, and something inside me clicked. From that night, James became my constant. He had a knack for small, thoughtful gestures, a jar of jam from a local market, a bundle of wildflowers tied with twine, a novel he'd found because I'd mentioned it in passing. He turned ordinary moments into something extraordinary. 2 years later, we stood beneath a sprawling maple tree, exchanging vows before our loved ones. I wore my grandmother's silver locket, and James didn't bother hiding the tears that fell when he saw me walk down the aisle. He wasn't afraid to feel deeply, to love without reservation. We settled into a modest cottage just outside town, a fixer-upper James swore he could transform. And he did. Weekends spent refinishing floors, building bookshelves, and crafting a rocking chair for our first anniversary. That chair still sits on our porch, a quiet testament to countless evenings spent swaying together, watching lightning bugs flicker in the Tennessee dusk. Our life felt whole, even if it wasn't flawless. The one piece missing was children. We started trying soon after the wedding, assuming it would happen naturally, like it seemed for everyone else. But months passed with no change. Doctors told us my body wasn't cooperating, that natural conception might never happen. We pursued treatments, medications, injections, endless clinic visits, and eventually IVF. The first round failed. So did the next. Each negative result chipped away at me, as if my body was failing us both. But James never wavered. On nights when I sobbed until my head throbbed, he'd hold me close and whisper, "Sarah, this doesn't change how much I love you." He even brought up adoption, his eyes lighting up as he talked about giving a child a home, building a family in our own way. I wanted to embrace that vision. I truly did. But part of me still yearned to see a child with his hazel eyes and that lopsided grin he flashed when he was holding back a larf. After another failed IVF cycle, I broke down in his arms, choking out apologies through tears. "You deserve a wife who can give you a family." He cupped my face, guiding my gaze to his, and said, "Sarah, I didn't marry you for a family. I married you for you. You're my home." That was James, unyielding, compassionate, selfless. He could have been frustrated or withdrawn, but instead, he chose love every single time. Reflecting now, I see how those earlier trials forged us for the tempest ahead. The nights we clung to each other through heartbreak, the dreams we reimagined together, they were our training ground for the storm that would append our lives. When James fell ill, our world shattered. Yet, even in his weakened state, pale and fragile in that hospital bed, he tried to be my rock. He cracked jokes about the bland hospital meals, teased me for hovering too much, and promised would conquer this, just as we had every other obstacle. But deep down, I knew this was different. This was a fight for his life, and I wasn't ready to envision a world without him. It began so subtly we barely noticed. James started coming home from his workshop earlier, shrugging off his exhaustion with that easy grin. "Just a long day," he'd say. But the weariness didn't lift, it deepened, like an unseen weight dragging him down. Then came the bruises, faint at first, as if he'd brushed against a tool bench, but soon they spread without cores, dark patches blooming across his arms and thighs. One night, I woke to him gasping, hands pressed to his chest, struggling for air. The nurse in me screamed that something was gravely wrong. I pleaded with him to see a doctor, and when he finally relented, I clung to the hope it was something minor, maybe low iron or overwork. Instead, we were sent to a hematologist who ordered a battery of tests. I'll never forget the moment the results came back. The doctor sat us down, his expression too grave, his words measured. "James, you have aplastic anemia. It's rare, and in your case, it's aggressive. Your bone marrow is failing." It felt like the ground vanished beneath me. James, ever steady, just nodded and asked, "What's the plan?" The answer was both straightforward and daunting. A bone marrow transplant was his only hope. Without it, his body couldn't produce blood cells. But the catch was finding a donor match, ideally a close relative. I looked at James, silently pleading for him to mention someone, anyone, but I knew the truth. Raised in foster care, shuffled between homes, he had no knowledge of his parents or siblings, no family to lean on. We enrolled in the National Donor Program right away, but the doctors didn't sugarcoat it. Finding a compatible stranger could take months, even years, and James's condition was deteriorating fast. His skin grew ashen, his once steady hand shook when he reached for a glass. The man who used to carve intricate designs into wood late into the night now struggled to cross the room. Yet he still tried to shield me, making light of the hospital gowns, joking he was rocking the bald look as his hair thinned from treatment. At night, when he thought I was asleep, I'd hear his whispered prayers, not for his own strength, but for mine. I'd grip his hand in that hospital bed, forcing a smile and saying, we've got this." But inside, I was unraveling, terrified of losing him, of facing an empty home, of navigating a future I hadn't imagined. One afternoon, after another grueling round of transfusions, the doctor pulled me aside. Her voice was soft but heavy with finality. "Sarah, we're running out of time. Without a donor match soon, I'm afraid he won't make it much longer." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak, tears stinging my eyes. I'd seen death before. Working as a nurse, you confront it more than most. But nothing braced me for the thought of losing James. Desperate for a moment to breathe, I stepped into the hospital garden, grasping for anything to ground me. That's when I overheard it, 2 staff members on a break, chatting idly, unaware I was near. "That guy in ICU, Harper? He looks just like some feller from Willow Creek." My breath caught, the words ringing in my ears. "He looks just like some feller from Willow Creek." My heart stuttered. Willow Creek, a quiet valley town about 2 hours from Chattanooga. Was it just a fluke? People look alike all the time. Or could it mean James had family out there, someone who might be his match? For the first time in weeks, a spark flickered inside me, hope, delicate and unsteady, but hope all the same. Willow Creek was a sleepy place, nestled in the hills, where time seemed to move slower. I'd visited once during nursing school for a health outreach program, a town where folks still nodded at strangers and lingered on porches. It could be nothing, just a passing resemblance, but a quiet instinct urged me otherwise. James had been left at a hospital as a newborn, raised in foster care with no clue about his roots. He'd once shared, on a warm evening as we rocked on our porch, how he'd thought about searching for his birth family. "Sometimes I wonder if there's someone out there with my eyes or my laugh," he'd said, his voice tinged with a longing he rarely let show. "But if they didn't want me then, why would they now?" He'd let the idea fade, choosing to build his family with me, insisting that love made a home, not blood. But now, blood was everything. It could mean the difference between life and death. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by James's bedside, his hand limp in mine as the monitors droned softly. His face was ghostly under the fluorescent lights, his breaths shallow but even. "I'm going to make this right, Jamie," I whispered. "Whatever it takes." The next morning, I requested emergency leave from work. My supervisor, a kind woman who knew James's condition, hugged me tightly and approved it without hesitation. I packed a small bag, my pulse racing with equal parts fear and resolve. I had no name, just a vague lead about a man in Willow Creek who looked like my husband. Clutching a photo of James on my phone, I held onto that thin thread of possibility. Before I left, I visited James's room. He was awake, his faint smile warming his tired eyes. "You look like you're on a mission," he teased, his voice frail but soft. I kissed his forehead and murmured, "Maybe I am." He started to ask more, but I cut him off gently. "Just rest, okay? I'll be back soon." I couldn't tell him about Willow Creek or the man who might be his kin. Not yet. I couldn't bear to raise his hopes only to crush them if this lead was a dead end. The drive from Chattanooga felt like a dream. The city faded into winding backroads, past fields of spring wildflowers and rolling hills. As I crossed the narrow stone bridge into Willow Creek, I whispered a prayer. Please, let this be real. Let there be someone who can save him. I parked outside a small feed store, stepping out with my phone gripped tightly. The town moved at its own rhythm, farmers hauling grain bags, an old man whittling on a bench, kids darting by on bikes. I scanned every face, searching for James's strong cheekbones, his hazel eyes, anything familiar inside the feed store. I approached the counter, where a woman in her 60s with warm eyes was sorting receipts. "Excuse me," I said, my voice shaky. "I'm looking for someone. I don't know his name, but they say he looks like this." I showed her James's photo. Her eyes widened instantly. "That's got to be Caleb Morris. Lives out on Ridge Road, near the orchards." Spitting image of him. My heart leapt. "Can you point me to Ridge Road?" I asked, my voice barely steady. The woman at the feed store scribbled directions on a scrap of paper, her kind eyes softening with curiosity. I thanked her and hurried back to my car, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. I didn't know if this Caleb Morris was truly tied to James, but one thing was certain. I was about to find out. The road to Ridge Road was a narrow, potholed stretch, weaving through dense cedar groves and rolling pastures. A light rain began to fall, a gentle mist that blurred the windshield and softened the edges of the world. I slowed as I spotted a faded mailbox, the name Morris barely legible in chipped paint. The house beyond was weathered, its clapboard siding peeling, surrounded by apple orchards and a muddy driveway. A tire swing swayed lazily in the breeze, and a distant rooster crowed. I sat in the car, my heart pounding, fingers locked on the steering wheel. What if this was a mistake? What if I was about to barge into a stranger's life and embarrass myself? But then I pictured James, his trembling hand in mine, his brave smile masking the fear in his eyes. I stepped out into the drizzle. The porch steps creaked under my weight as I climbed them. I knocked softly at first, then more firmly when no one answered. After a moment, the door swung open. A man stood there, taller than I'd imagined, with broad shoulders and a slight hunch, his dark brown hair falling unevenly across his brow. His eyes, my breath hitched. They were James's eyes, hazel and sharp, with the same quiet intensity. He squinted at me, cautious. "Can I help you?" His voice was low, guarded, like someone unaccustomed to visitors. With trembling hands, I held up my phone, showing him James's photo. "This is my husband, James Harper. They said you look like him." He stared at the screen, his frown deepening, his expression shifting from confusion to something heavier, disbelief, maybe even pain. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "Well, I'll be." He looked at me, his gaze softening. "Who are you?" "Sarah," I said, my voice catching. "I'm his wife." He stepped back, holding the door open. "You'd better come in." The house was modest, scuffed wooden floors, a mix of worn furniture, the faint scent of wood smoke and engine grease. He nodded toward a chair. "Sit." I sank into it, clutching my bag tightly. "You're saying he's your husband?" I nodded. "He's in the hospital, very sick. He needs a bone marrow transplant. They told us he has no family, but then I heard about you, and my voice broke, tears threatening. I had to come." The man, Caleb Morris, sat across from me, his elbows resting on his knees as he studied James's photo again, shaking his head in disbelief. I think he might be my brother, he said, his voice low and unsteady. The words struck me like a bolt, stealing my breath. Your brother? I whispered. Caleb nodded, his gaze distant. Our mother, she wasn't much for parenting. Had a handful of kids, different fathers. When I was young, she had another boy. Said she couldn't keep him. Left him at the hospital, signed the papers, and that was it. I was just a kid myself, couldn't do a thing. But I never stopped wondering where he ended up. He dragged a hand across his face, his voice catching. I didn't even know his name until now. Tears stung my eyes. James has spent his whole life searching for family, I said. He thought he was alone. Caleb's jaw clenched, and he stood abruptly. I'll do it. The transplant. No question. He crossed the room, grabbing his truck keys from a hook by the door. When do we leave? I stared, stunned by his decisiveness. I'd braced myself for a fight, ready to plead or explain, but there was no need. It was as if he'd been waiting for this moment, unknowingly carrying it all these years. We left Willow Creek that evening, the rain now a steady drum against the windshield as Caleb followed in his battered pickup. For the first time in months, my chest felt lighter, like I could breathe again. Fear still lingered, it always did, but now there was hope, something solid to stand on. At St. Mary's Medical Center, I guided Caleb through the fluorescent-lit halls to James's room. James was awake, propped against pillows, his face pale but his eyes sparking when he saw me. Then they flickered to Caleb, narrowing in confusion. For a long moment, silence hung heavy. James's lips parted, as if he were seeing a reflection of himself. Caleb stepped forward, his voice thick. I think I'm your brother. James blinked, tears pooling instantly. My brother, he murmured, the words barely audible. I stood frozen, watching two men, strangers hours ago, bound by blood, lock eyes, some unspoken recognition passing between them. James extended a trembling hand, and Caleb clasped it firmly. We'll talk soon, Caleb said softly. But right now, I'm here to save you. The doctors moved quickly, knowing James's condition was slipping fast. Caleb's test results came back sooner than I'd dared hope. When the hematologist entered the waiting room, her face lit with a cautious smile, my legs nearly buckled. He's a new perfect match, she said. One of the strongest we've seen. I turned to Caleb, tears spilling over. You're a match. You can save him. His face flickered with shock, then resolve. Then let's get it done. When do we start? That night, James and Caleb finally had time to talk. I lingered just outside the door, giving them space, but their voices carried, soft at first, tentative, then growing warmer. James's voice cracked as he spoke. I used to imagine having a brother, you know? Thought it was a foolish dream, like wishing for something you'd never have. But here you are. Real. Caleb let out a soft laugh, his voice heavy with emotion. Life's got a funny way of working out, doesn't it? I'm sorry I wasn't there, Jamie, he said, his eyes glistening. I didn't even know you existed. James squeezed Caleb's hand, his grip surprisingly firm despite his frailty. No apologies needed. You're here now. That's what counts. When I stepped back into the room, James turned to me, tears shining in his eyes. I have a brother, Sarah. I'm not alone. I pressed a kiss to his forehead, my own tears falling as I whispered, You never were. The transplant was set for the next morning. Sleep eluded me, my mind spinning through every possible scenario. Caleb, though, was steady, even cracking jokes with the nurses as they prepped him. Never thought I'd be donating bone marrow to a guy I just met, he said with a grin, then glanced at James, his voice softening. But I'm damn glad it's him. The procedure dragged on, each hour an eternity, but it went smoothly. James was moved to recovery, the new stem cells beginning their quiet, life-saving work. I sat by his bedside, holding his hand, feeling a warmth in his skin I hadn't felt in months. A faint flush returned to his cheeks, a small sign of life rekindling. Caleb came in later, looking drained but calm. James reached out, his hand shaky but determined, and clasped his brother's arm. You gave me a second shot, he whispered. Caleb's mouth curved into a quiet smile. Guess that makes us square. You gave me a brother. Tears spilled freely now. For months, I'd carried a crushing weight, fear, isolation, dread. But sitting there, between these two men who'd found each other against impossible odds, I felt a stillness I'd almost forgotten. Peace. Outside, Chattanooga's skyline glowed under the evening stars, a reminder of how swiftly life could pivot from despair to hope. For the first time in months, I let myself believe James might pull through, and that we'd been given something even greater than we'd dared hope for, family. The days after the transplant felt like a new chapter. James's body began to respond, slowly but surely. Each morning, I watched for signs. More color in his face, a steadier voice, a firmer grip when he squeezed my hand. Caleb stayed close, crashing on a lumpy couch in the hospital lounge when he couldn't stay in James's room. He never once complained. One evening, I brought him a coffee and found him gazing at James through the window, a quiet wonder in his eyes. Is really my brother, he murmured, as if still grappling with the truth. On a cool fall afternoon, James took his first steps outside since the transplant. The air was crisp, the leaves a blaze of red and gold. He leaned on me, his steps tentative but determined, and for a moment, we just stood there, breathing in the world together, a world that, against all odds, still had him in it. I walked beside James as he moved slowly along the hospital's garden path, sunlight filtering through the vibrant fall leaves. I forgot how good the world smells, he murmured, his hand tightening around mine. A week later, James was cleared to go home, and we returned to our cozy cottage on the outskirts of Chattanooga, Caleb trailing behind in his weathered pickup, now a permanent part of our lives. The house felt different, warmer, as if it had been waiting to hold this newfound family. In the weeks that followed, Caleb became a fixture. He and James would sit on the porch in the evenings, swapping stories, James piecing together fragments of his foster care days, Caleb sharing what little he remembered of their mother and the siblings James never knew. One night, Caleb pulled out a worn leather wallet, its edges frayed, and handed it to James. It was our dad's, he said quietly. Only thing I've got of his. It's yours now. James turned it over in his hands, tears falling silently, the weight of connection settling into him. The folks in Willow Creek sent cards, prayers, and even homemade pies when word spread about the brothers' reunion. Strangers wrote notes saying, "A family's what matters most. Hold tight to each other." Those small acts of kindness, from people I'd never met, stitched together something broken in me. They were a reminder that even in the darkest times, compassion still thrived. Months passed, and James grew stronger. His hair thickened, his laugh rang out again, and he started tinkering in the garage, crafting cabinets with a slower but familiar spark. One evening, he led me to the porch, where a new rocking chair stood, its wood polished smooth with care. "For you," he said softly. I sank into it, tears blurring my vision as the chair's gentle creak wrapped me in warmth. Caleb joined our traditions, too. Sunday suppers became a ritual, filled with laughter and quiet thanks. Sometimes, I'd catch James and Caleb exchanging glances, their lopsided grins mirroring each other, as if they still couldn't believe they'd found one another. On a crisp fall evening, James and I strolled down a quiet, tree-lined lane near Willow Creek, hand in hand, watching leaves drift in the wind. Caleb walked ahead, hoisting his neighbor's young daughter onto his shoulders, her giggles echoing. James squeezed my hand, his eyes soft. "I thought I'd lost everything," he said. "But look at us now. We've got more than I ever dreamed." "You know," James said, his voice soft against the rustling leaves, "I used to think being an orphan meant I'd always be on my own. I was wrong. I've got you. And now I've got him." His words sank into me, warm and true, settling deep in my heart. I looked at him, my eyes tracing the familiar lines of his face, now softened with peace. "Family's not always about blood, Jamie," I whispered. "But when it is, it's a gift." That night, we gathered around a small fire pit behind Caleb's house in Willow Creek, the flames painting golden flickers across everyone's faces. I felt a quiet certainty I hadn't known in ages, a deep assurance that we were going to be all right. Life had torn us apart, but it had also stitched us back together in ways I never could have imagined. I leaned my head against James's shoulder, listening as Caleb shared a story about the old neighborhood where he'd grown up, his voice warm with memory. I thought to myself, this is what healing feels like. Our story had begun in shadows, steeped in fear and uncertainty. But it didn't end there. It ended with family, with second chances, a brother found, and a life reborn. As I closed my eyes, the fire's crackle mingling with the steady warmth of James's hand in mine, a truth settled over me. Sometimes, just when hope feels out of reach, life hands you exactly what you need.